told me that some of the steel dossier was produced in Ukraine, and he said, you should have figured out yourself because steel hadn't been in Russia in 9 years. How the hell could you write about Russia?
So, Mr. Mayor, kind of to this point, next week everything changes with regard to the whole impeachment witch hunt. It's going to become this made-for-TV circus. They're going to have finally now they're going to have some of these hearings be public. So next Wednesday, this is coming up. Putting on your 1980s Southern District hat for a moment, as you're looking at this whole cast of unelected bureaucrats who are teaming up with Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff to try to undermine the president, if you could be a member of the House Intel Committee for a day, who would you, Rudy Giuliani, most like to cross-examine that might be coming up for a hearing if you had the opportunity to?
Adam Schiff. I think he plotted the whole thing.
Oh, you're serious about this? This is not a throwaway on. You would actually want to bring Schiff up and have him testify?
I think Schiff has the only crime there is the way they put this together. I mean, if you take all the emotion out and all of the media spinning, which is disgusting, and you read that transcript, which I've read now about 20 times, there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, you could even argue that the president had an obligation to ask him to investigate this corruption. Under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, he has to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. A lot of presidents don't seem to realize that, but that's their obligation. And somebody could have criticized him with this tremendous number of allegations of how they interfered with us, and he doesn't ask for cooperation. I mean, everybody was all upset about Russian collusion, and all of a sudden the Ukrainian collusion, which seems to be real, it doesn't matter, it's not true, it's been debunked, it's never been investigated. So I would like to ask Schiff how this all came about. And then I'd like to get Zaid, the lawyer who announced in 2017 that there was going to be a coup and they were going to take Trump out in an impeachment.
He announced that on Facebook or Twitter?
That was on Twitter.
On Twitter, Merritt, that's what you're referring to?
A couple of weeks after the inauguration, he announced that there's going to be a coup, we're going to take him out, there's going to be an impeachment, and CNN is going to help us. All that's in writing. This is the guy who brings forward the anonymous source, who also turns out to be a political activist. So to me, this was just another iteration of their attempt to work out the Peter Strzok plan, to prevent him from being in office, then to remove him on anything they can make stick. They couldn't let Russian collusion didn't stick, obstruction didn't stick. Now this one actually fell apart. They announced it as President Trump threatens Zelensky with no military aid. The president, in a bold move, puts out the transcript. You read the transcript, it doesn't say anything about military aid. There's no threat. It's a request. Biden is mentioned for 4 lines out of 1,000. He's like an afterthought almost a necessary afterthought because he's enmeshed in all of that corruption. It's never been investigated. I mean, I think the president quite rightly thought this is the end of it. I mean, my God. And Zelensky, the only guy who really would count in terms of pressure, Zelensky said, I wasn't pressured. He actually laughed. If you read it, it's a very pleasant conversation. And even this thing about holding up a meeting, there was a meeting, and they agreed to a meeting in the very conversation.
Well, that's to your point there, Mr. Mayor. I mean, this is I think the reason why the president had all the folks up there behind his speech the other night with the read the transcript shirts. Is I mean, I can't. I mean, there's so many different folks, whether they be in the media or people I bump into around town, that try to give analysis to this phone call that haven't even read through the transcript. And it's very clear. I mean, look, President Zelensky is the one who brings up corruption. President Zelensky is one who brings up multiple investigations. But, Mr. Mayor, there's an important point with your being the legal genius and the top prosecutor that you are. I see all this hubbub about the whistleblower. And we saw this letter that Mark Zaid, the We're Going to Get Him guy, that he sent over to the White House last night.
This is the cease and desist letter?
This is the cease and desist letter, which they're pushing back on President Trump, saying that he has the right to confront his accuser. Now, I had not read the Whistleblower Act, but we had David Rivkin on and
Right.
he was explaining something. So I went and read it. I'm not being a lawyer, but I went through and I read that. Can you give us a little insight about what the Whistleblower Act actually does and does not provide protections for, and in particular, this whole false canard that grants some anonymity?
Well, I mean, if a whistleblower could be anonymous, then you'd have to amend the Constitution, because you can't be convicted without being faced by your accusers. So you talked about when I prosecuted the Mafia. I couldn't prosecute them with Sammy the Bull, behind a screen. Sammy had to come out and look at John Gotti and, take the risk that he's going to get blown up as a result of that. You can't be convicted by anonymous accusers any place but in the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. It's almost ridiculous to contemplate. The Whistleblower Act gives you protection against retribution. It's mostly an employment act. It gives you protection against retribution if you bring out dishonesty in your agency. Or there are a lot of civil remedies like that in corporations. But it doesn't say we're going to put a man in prison or we're going to impeach the President of the United States, and he doesn't get a chance to face the person who's accusing him. After all, the guy could be lying. Just because you're a whistleblower doesn't make you a saint. There are good whistleblowers and there are bad whistleblowers. There are good informants and there are bad informants. And that's why we have a trial, and that's why we have cross-examination. And it's in the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Basically, Schiff has completely trashed the Constitution. No right of counsel, no right of cross-examination, no right to call witnesses. Not only that, he's going after the president's lawyers. They threatened Barr with being put in prison. And they are conducting at least 20 different investigations of me to try to find if I did something wrong in grammar school. And they're doing the same thing to Jay Sekulow. I mean, if we were representing a major terrorist, Sekulow and I, and this happened, the entire press corps would protect us and make us heroes in carrying out our responsibility in defending, somebody who's unpopular. From their point of view, he's unpopular. From their point of view, he's unpopular. But damn it, he's entitled to a defense. Well, we're not American.
No, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. And I think there's a point I'd also like to get you to drill down on for a moment. When we talk about this whole coup effort, which I firmly believe I've said on the show a number of times, this is a political coup that's happening right in front of us in real time. This whistleblower, which you can go to everything from Drudge to Don Jr.'s Twitter feed and get the whistleblower's name. There's been a lot of talk about that publicly. But for this, what I want to know, this goes to your point about Adam Schiff having to testify, what exactly was the coordination of the whistleblower with Schiff and his staff? But also, too, I want to know how much of an effort Mark Zaid was behind this, because the whistleblower, looking at the alleged whistleblower, his alleged background, didn't just magically pop up and start citing U.S. code. I mean, you really had to scheme and work with someone to come up with this to try to undermine the president. What are your thoughts on that, as far as what kind of help you might be able to speculate as to this whistleblower receiving, or what kind of involvement you think Schiff may have had?
I think if we investigate this, we're going to find out, Jason, Dan, and Steve, that it was Plan B or C. Plan A was, let's stop him from being president. Let's see if we can jam up Papadopoulos and wiretap illegally Page. And they tried to get that out before the election. They illegally leaked the black ledger on Manafort before the election. But they were hoping that would stop them. Then they had the backup plan. The backup plan was, the phony Russian collusion thing, the FISA wires, where Comey committed perjury, plenty of other crimes committed by them. Schiff's staff spent 20 hours with Michael Cohen, getting him ready to testify. And that didn't help since he lied 7 times.
Mayor, is all this is what I keep saying, that all the stuff, the 40 subpoenas given to Rosenstein, what's happening with the U.S. Attorney Durham, all these different, the Crossfire Hurricane, all of that, because they're all kind of inextricably linked to this. Are the American people ever going to get the truth? Look, the American people have forget Republicans and Democrats. American people are decent. They have common sense. They've been through political crisis like this before.
Right.
They weigh and measure, and they always come to a right and smart judgment. but they need the information. How is all this going to come out? Because certainly the process has been run today. Look, I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi's ideology, but I think she's a master in political information warfare.
It was a great understanding, Steve, of how they can control the media. I will say one thing. If we had their advantages, we'd be just as good. In other words, if I could cover the guy who thinks there was no quid pro quo, then I would have an advantage. So they have a compliant media that emphasizes what they want, and Schiff played it like a violin. That's why they did the secret hearings. They put a guy in there, secret hearings, and then they come out and they leak immediately the negative things that he said or that they can contort. Our guys come out and correct it, but they get covered, and our guys get buried.
Yes.
So this is like playing
but how
basketball.
to tell me, because we're listening to all of this is all over. We're on the John Frederick Radio Network, but picked up all over the nation. How are the American people going to get this information? Because next week's just going to be another. It's going to be a public.
Circus.
It's a public circus. It's a little more access. You're going to be able to see it. You're going to have Jim Jordan asking questions, but it's going to be very limited. We can't subpoena witnesses. We're going to have to. It's going to be a back
Or evidence.
or evidence. How, in your mind, is the American people going to get all the information about this so they can weigh and measure it?
The same way we want. We have to just be on the air constantly in all the ways we can communicate. The president tweeting, everybody else getting on the air, tweeting, engaging in social media, doing shows like this, trying to get out the other side.
So you're saying combat it. You're saying there's got to be a sense of urgency. One of the reasons we started the show, there's on all of our side, we're not pointing the finger at any one person, but all of us. There's not a sense of urgency that this is now, we're engaged in combat.
It is. We are engaged in combat, and even if they don't impeach him, they're hoping that somehow it'll take his numbers down, and maybe they can beat him. When I came into the investigation, Steve, he was like, it was like 20 points in favor of impeachment. And that's frankly much more than Mueller. I knew Mueller couldn't indict him, but I knew if they had 20 points in favor of impeachment, they would indict him for jaywalking, because it's all political. So what I did with Jay was we changed the strategy to an internal strategy to deal with Mueller, and the external strategy was to be on television and defend everything. You wouldn't normally do that in a criminal investigation because it's done secretly in a grand jury. There's no point in doing that. But this is going to be decided, you're right, by the American people. And if we're pretty close to even on impeachment, they're not going to impeach him.
That's a great point. I want to make sure, Mayor, that everyone picked up on that. Can you say that again? Because I think that's critical.
Yeah, the jury here has always been the American people, because we know that Congress follows public opinion. And if public opinion is widely in favor of impeachment, like it was for Nixon, and like it wasn't for Clinton, that's going to decide it. And if it's even, it's too risky.
You think in the House process, I just want to make sure we bifurcate this. I'm not talking about the trial and the acquittal. You think even in this impeachment process, as we started a week ago, that really kicks off on a national televised on Wednesday, you believe that if people go to the ramparts and really start putting pressure on congressmen, that you can actually thwart Nancy Pelosi bringing 2 articles of impeachment against the president sometime in December and defeat that?
I think that's a closer question than impeachment in general, but I think that it can be stopped, yes. I think that if there's enough pressure, particularly on the 30, 40, that could likely lose their seats if they vote any kind of article of impeachment. Because actually, the more we concentrate on this, the better it's going to get for the president.
100%. That's why I love me some Rudy. This is the heart of it. We've talked about it. Those 31, like Max Rose in Staten Island, Lieutenant Commander was Mickey Sherrill up in New Jersey, 11. These congressmen that Nancy Pelosi said in 18 never mention impeachment. Talk about health care, talk about the economy, talk about national security. Don't mention impeachment. Rudy's right. If you train the spotlight on them, that's the way you stop this.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked again, whether it be Susie Lee in Nevada or Cindy Axne in Iowa or Chris Pappas in New Hampshire. These are these vulnerable House Democrat freshmen that nobody talks about, nobody knows. But
So Mayor, you're reaching a big grassroots audience. How do people actually do that? How is that actually done? We've got about a minute left with you. So how do you propose out there to your fellow Americans that this actually takes place?
Rallies, letters, calls, social media. Those are the things we do now. We do have the ability to engage with social media, making it clear to our congressmen that we're very, very angry about this. And the reality is, I also think the longer it plays out, the better it is for us. Because the longer it plays out, more and more people read the transcript, more and more people calm down, things get a little quieter, and they start to see the contradictions that I was pointing out.
Substance
It's
granular.
a little complicated, but the contradictions are powerful. I mean, they're really powerful. And a reading of that transcript, I think it's going to change the minds of 3/4 of the people. They just sit down and quietly read it and realize that the whole crime of extortion, and it wasn't a crime, but the whole act of extortion, it involves, did you pressure the victim?
Mr. Mayor,
He's the only one that counts. He says no.
Mr. Mayor, we've got a heart out. We want to really, America's Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, honored to have you on.